China is defending Iranian aggression in the Middle East. And US officials are headed to China for even more economic talks, even as the Chinese steel industry might be collapsing. Then more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, you should be using a VPN like Surfshark to cover your tracks and protect your identity. I'll tell you more at the end. So let's start off with something light. Conflict in the Middle East. China is supporting Iran in the recent Middle East tensions, which have escalated over the past few weeks, because of course it is. On Sunday, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a phone call with the Islamic Republic's acting foreign minister, where he repeated Beijing's denunciation of the assassination of the Hamas leader in Tehran. Because China would never try to take out political enemies in another country, and especially not using a series of secret police stations located in countries all around the world, hypothetically. So far, nobody has claimed responsibility for the killing, but it's widely believed that Israel was behind it, and Iran and its proxies are threatening to respond militarily. The Chinese Communist Party said the assassination endangers ceasefire talks for Gaza and regional stability. And if anyone would know anything about destabilizing regions, it's the Chinese Communist Party. Wang stressed that China supports Iran in defending its sovereignty, security, and national dignity in accordance with the law, and in its efforts to maintain regional peace and stability, and stands ready to maintain close communication with Iran. I wonder if China would support Taiwan or the Philippines in defending their sovereignty. Given that Iran is funding terror, helping Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and potentially threatening a wider war in the Middle East, I'm not sure how even the CCP can seriously believe that Iran is engaged in efforts to maintain regional peace and stability. So they're either lying, stupid, or perhaps most likely, stupid liars. But the CCP support for Tehran isn't stopping the US from sending officials to China for even more economic meetings, which, as I've covered, has been about as effective as protecting yourself from a tsunami using a flamingo inner tube. The meeting started Thursday and continued on Friday and are aimed at keeping ties steady between Washington and Beijing despite rising tensions. According to the head of the delegation, the gathering builds on Janet Yellen and Joe Biden's guidance to establish durable lines of communication as we responsibly manage our relationship with China. And according to the Treasury, officials are also expected to discuss possible revisions to China's anti-money laundering law. But given past results, this gathering is even less likely to result in decency and sound financial decisions than the gathering of the juggalos. There are certainly plenty of economic issues to address in China, especially since its steel industry could be headed toward a severe crisis. China's steel market is the world's biggest by far, but property downturn and weaker factory activity so far this year have weakened domestic demand. As a result, mills are seeing large losses, and prices have plunged to multi-year lows. The chairman of China's Baowu Steel Group Corporation told his company's half-year meeting that the crisis will be longer and more difficult to endure than we expected, which is actually a pretty great slogan for the CCP as a whole. Baowu alone produces 7% of the world's steel, and the chairman's comments contributed on Wednesday to weakness across iron ore and steel markets. According to the Hindustan Times, in the previous slumps during the Great Recession and from 2015 to 2016, the CCP resolved the crises through massive stimulus. But that's looking more remote in 2024 as Xi Jinping bids to reshape the economy. Given that China's economy is already in a slump, that's not a good sign. It's like having your house catch on fire, then deciding now is the time to install a jacuzzi. And all Baowu had to offer in the way of advice was calling on employees to save cash and minimize risk, which is about as comforting as being on a flight that's going down and the captain comes on the PA to say, "Pray to whomever you believe in." Speaking of minimizing risks, a new report is showing that nearly all Chinese banks are refusing to process payments from Russia. Maybe all those warnings from Blinken and Yellen at previous economic talks worked after all. Just goes to show, if at first you don't succeed, try again. The pro-Kremlin Russian media outlet Izvestia reports that 98% of Chinese banks, even smaller regional ones, are refusing to accept direct Chinese payment transfers from Russia. Back in May and June, some of those smaller financial companies were still processing Russian payments, but it looks like something's changed over the past 3 weeks. So once again, we find there are limits in the no-limit partnership. Kind of like how the never-ending soup, salad, and breadsticks at Olive Garden do end, when they drag me out of the restaurant kicking and screaming at closing time. Last month, Russia media outlet Kommersant reported that about 80% of bank transfers made in yuan were bouncing back with no explanation after the payments were stalled for weeks while banks decided whether they could fulfill the transaction. So yes, something's definitely changed. Izvestia says the payment challenges with Chinese banks could contribute to supply chain difficulties and inflation in Russia. The Kremlin is working on setting up alternatives such as cryptocurrency. You know you're in a sad state of affairs when crypto is your most reliable form of currency. And according to Reuters, Moscow and Beijing are considering reviving barter trade to get around sanctions and maintain their partnership. Yes, bartering. I guess if these regimes are going to conduct themselves like it's the Dark Ages, fitting they trade like it too. China does have a history of using bartering for trade. Such arrangements were common during the Soviet era, but disappeared shortly after the USSR collapsed. But in 2019, China agreed to trade palm oil worth nearly $150 million from Malaysia for construction services, natural resources products, and civilian and defense equipment. I guess that's a decent trade since palm oil is better than what China usually sells, which is snake oil. Then in 2021, to get around sanctions on Iran, a Chinese company exported auto parts worth $2 million to the country in exchange for pistachios. I would hope they at least gave them unshelled pistachios, preferably chili lime flavor. But a barter economy is pretty embarrassing for two countries that wish to be seen as global powers, and doesn't look promising for Putin's alliance with Xi. With some Chinese banks rejecting payments in the ruble and hesitant to do business with Russia through Hong Kong, some Russian companies are still sending yuan to China through Russian bank branches on the mainland, but they face a 5% markup. And since it's likely that some Chinese companies will still refuse even those payments, going through friendly third countries and bartering are likely to dominate trade between the two countries going forward. Hey, maybe China will learn to enjoy it and try to get everything they want this way. Hey Taiwan, if you give up your sovereignty and let us rule, we've got plenty of palm oil. And after the break, is the CCP still trying to mediate between Russia and Ukraine? Welcome back. China is calling on Ukraine and Russia to de-escalate tensions in their war, which is like a call to end gun violence hosted by Duke Nukem. The warning came as Ukraine launched a military operation into Russia's Kursk region, and has continued expanding its control there amid a flailing response by the Kremlin. Wait, did Zelensky just create his own special limited military operation in Russia? Touché. I'd ask Putin how he likes a taste of his own medicine, but we all know his medicine is poison. China's foreign ministry said that all parties should observe the 3 principles for de-escalating the situation, namely no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of fighting, and no fueling the flame by any party. Interestingly, the CCP had nothing to say about Russia's expansion of the battlefield a few months ago into Kharkiv, and its continued escalation of missile strikes on Ukraine. The CCP also said it will continue to maintain communication with the international community to play a constructive role for the political settlement of the crisis. And I'm sure they'll be effective, just as much as I'm sure Duke Nukem is able to resolve conflicts with therapy and hugs. Speaking of Chinese de-escalation, the Philippines has condemned Chinese military actions in the South China Sea over the past few days. Last week, both countries held military exercises in the region. China on its own, while the Philippines conducted joint exercises with the US, Japan, Canada, and Australia. On Thursday, things got particularly heated when 2 Chinese aircraft dropped flares in the path of a Philippine aircraft during a routine patrol around the disputed Scarborough Shoal. So predictably, the Philippines and China condemned each other. China blamed the Philippines for disrupting its military exercises, which sounds like punching someone and saying, "Get out of the way of my fists." But Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. called Beijing's actions unjustified, illegal, and reckless, and urged China to act responsibly in both the sea and the skies. To which China probably responded by saying, "But you didn't say the land." A deal between the Philippines and China on a Filipino outpost in the South China Sea is up for future review. Last month, the two countries reached a vague provisional agreement after repeated altercations near the Second Thomas Shoal. The agreement would allow for humanitarian resupply of items like food, water, and medicine to Filipino military personnel on the World War II-era ship Sierra Madre, which the Philippines grounded in 1999 and uses as a base. But the quite literal flare-up recently could complicate that arrangement. Foreign Affairs Undersecretary Maria Teresa Lazaro said the review will be there when that will be is subject to further discussion. Oh, so like the kettlebells I bought during COVID, they're there, but who knows when I'll actually use them. She also reiterated that the understanding reached with the CCP only applies to the Second Thomas Shoal and doesn't change Manila's stance on the South China Sea as a whole. Both sides agreed not to disclose details of the deal without the other country's input, but given the continuing tensions and the fact that this is the CCP we're talking about, this deal will probably last about as long as J-Lo's concert tour. Now I want to give a big thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this episode. When you go online, everything you do is potentially compromised, unless you're taking active steps to protect yourself. And that's why no matter where you live, no matter what you do online, you should always be keeping your internet activity private with a VPN like Surfshark, especially when you're doing things like logging into your bank account or credit card online. If you ever use shared Wi-Fi, you're in danger. Hackers can easily steal your password without you even knowing it. And when you travel, especially overseas, you might need a VPN that makes it look like you're in your home country just to log into your accounts. So it saves a huge potential hassle. And you can install it on as many devices as you want, even on your Amazon Fire TV stick. It's great if you want to make it appear like you're logged in from a different country, so you can access all the good Netflix shows that are geo-blocked. So seriously, check out Surfshark. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored, and you'll get 4 months extra when you sign up. That's surfshark.com/uncensored, or use the code uncensored at checkout. The link is in the description below. And here's a video I want to show you about how China is taking over the video game industry. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.